moderator of this plenary speech is Professor Wen-Ying Ding. Welcome, Professor Ding.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the plenary speech. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, we're going to take the form of webinar to invite our plenary speaker, Dr. Martin Debray-Plard from France. Right? And Dr. Martin Debray-Plard is full professor in applied linguistics at the University of Bordeaux in France. And she is also deputy head of LACES, which is a research group aiming at cultures, interdisciplinary studies of education, culture, and languages. I think Martin's special interest is in anything that are concerned about languages and intercultural and interlanguages, multilingual, okay, that sort of very special terms. And Martin has been part of European projects in intercultural telecollaboration on and off for several years, so she is an expert in this field. And today the topic is learning environments for new teaching competencies. I believe Martin has a lot to share. Let's welcome her.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Hope the sound is okay now. And first, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and dear students. First, I'd like to thank the scientific committee, the organizing committee, for this invitation. I really feel honored to be with you through this wonderful technology to participate in this conference about competency-based English learning. So my title is about learning environments for new teaching competencies. First, I will list the ground for competencies in languages. Being in Europe, I need to speak about common European framework for languages. And from this document, we'll try to explain what are language competencies, what is the curriculum goal, cultural competence. This will lead to this new teaching practice with intercultural learning environments, and particularly intercultural telecollaborations. And a little bit about the TILA projects, Euro projects to 4. And I will conclude to competence for languages in the 21st century, post-COVID area. Before starting, I would like to reflect on or competency, because in English, I have these two words, and as linguists, obviously we're interested in there's a different word, probably there is different meaning. So it's interesting is sometimes they're really used one from the other. Let's look at it. What's interesting is in the dictionary, they treat these two words as having the same meaning. A competence, a framework in which behaviors, knowledge, and for each role are described, or competency model, the process and results required for success, the task, best practices, skills that are mapped to the work results. So those focus on this, so they also confound the two concepts. In the Oxford Dictionary, we have competence, which is really frequent and less frequent according to the Oxford Dictionary. It's less frequent. It's a unaccountable word, and it's very interesting to see that the definition is competence in doing something, competence in doing something, the ability to do something, to gain a high level of competence in English, for example. But with competency, the meaning is exactly the same. They give exactly the same definition, except for the second meaning of the word, competence ENCE, just professional technical competence. And competency, C1, it's a suitable word, a special term, skill that you need in a particular job or a particular task. I would say maybe there is a difference. That competence is a bit more general, and it's the successful achievement of one of competencies. In the document that to talk a little about, Common European for Languages, so in education, they tend to competence, ENE. And competency, it's meant about knowledge and skill, success in work, a professional, maybe or of work and in business. So if we have that distinction, we know that there's some kind of political debate about in business. There are different domains, and there's some kind of competition with these domains. Education has become and is nowadays a business, but to a certain extent, because it can never be reduced to it. It's a business because we have the of universities. It's a business because we treat more and more students as customers and teachers as well to a certain extent. But the finality is different. Can it be a product? Anyway, education brings several core competencies or abilities that are transferable to lifelong learning. We could say that this lifelong learning process is really the ultimate goal of education, the ultimate competence. Whereas for the world of work, they need specific competencies adapted to specific job descriptions. And maybe that's, we can see some difference between these two words. Now, I will talk to you because, well, being a European, and that's it originated, this notion of competencies in languages with the European Framework for Languages in 2001. So, how did it emerge? In fact, after the World War II, in 1951, we had 6 countries that decided to create this kind of open space. Basically, there were France and Germany, after the Second World War enemies. So it was just quickly after the World War that we decided to become friends and to create that European space. So the 6 original countries were France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands. But nowadays, in 2020, we are 27 countries. Unfortunately, they left a year, well, nearly a year, the 31st of January 2020. So, European Union at the moment, so you have in blue all members of this European Union. In yellow, you have the candidate, that is the country who would like to join the European Union. And you might be surprised because there are tensions at the Turkey, but it's still to join the European Union. In red, of course, fortunately, we have and Northern Ireland. So the goal of the European space, the European Union, is united in diversity. I think it's important to have that in mind because 27 countries, can you imagine, all in a kind of political space with 4 of. So the idea is that continent, different traditions, many cultures, many different languages, 24 official languages. So you can imagine all the translation and all the different problems of interpreting and at the European Union. So it's quite big. They have shared value, and the EU is trying to define this value, it fostered cooperation among the peoples of Europe, promoting unity, while preserving diversity and ensuring that decisions are taken as close as possible to citizens. So you can see that the language dimension is very, very important to manage some kind of unity in this political environment. So there's a political challenge, and that was a political challenge for Europe, just to be united with people different. But this political challenge was basically a linguistic challenge. How are we going to manage? How are we going to learn one another so many different languages? And it was an educative challenge. How are we going to create European for training the future European citizen? We had that big document, and published in 2001, and it was translated in the 24 official languages. Very quickly, we were surprised in Europe that translated in 4 languages, so more than official languages of Europe. So probably because it's beyond the dimension of the document, because it was really with a lot of researchers in applied linguistics all over, and it was really it took about 10 years that document. So it was obviously set and it fit the European agenda. But probably it goes beyond that because it's got a value beyond the political act. Particularly now, that's my point about language competencies. How are they viewed in this common European framework for languages? So here it's language use. So I think it's an interesting quote here. Oh, sorry. Embracing language learning, comprising the action performed by persons who, as individual and social agents, develop a range of competencies, both general or, in particular, communicative language competencies. So these general competencies, what are they? So there is knowledge, okay? So you know about a language, okay, or any language, or any culture. You have some knowledge, but it's very difficult to describe knowledge, but it's a general competence that people have. Then we have skills or know-how, savoir-faire. I put the French in English because it was really, I think French applied linguistics had a role in the way to conceptualize these general competencies. And so that's why I put the 2 terms in French and in English. So knowledge, skills. So now know-how, that is to say, maybe you know about a language, but what is important is how you're going to use it, what you're going to do with that language. There's also an existential attitude and relationship with this knowledge and with this know-how. How do you relate to that knowledge, to that culture yourself? And from all that, you will develop as human beings. We are learning all the time. So it's savoir-apprendre, it's ability to learn. So that's basically the general competencies. Now, if we go to communicative language competencies, in this common European framework for languages, we have can do. That is to say, we are going to have descriptors, but it's more specific. So language communicative competence, it's about first listening. We need to understand what people say in a foreign language, or that's the first skill. Then in order to have this learning, this listening ability, it will help us to speak. So that's another interesting aspect. So here we've got oral skills. If we've got listening and reading, because then you go to school and you learn how to read and write. So reading and listening, we can say it's receptive or reception skills. And speaking and writing, it's production skills, but reading and writing are also written skills. So it's quite, I think, clear of this model. And I put interaction everywhere because interaction is always there. When you listen to someone, there is an interaction with your previous knowledge, with other things that you know. So interaction is always there. It's not only when I talk to you and you're going to ask me questions. I hope so at the end of this talk. But just by listening, there is some kind of interaction and active interaction yourself for decoding what I'm saying and trying to find ways of relating it to your own knowledge. But all these skills with interaction, four skills, listening, reading, speaking and writing, plus interaction, which is everywhere, you need to add the linguistic part, because in order to listen to me, to understand what I'm saying, you need vocabulary, you need phonetics, you need, all this linguistic dimension. You know, sociolinguistic as well. Sociolinguistic is about the level of language I'm going to use. Well, here it's plenary, so it's academic kind of talk, and it's very, very different from a talk to a child, for example, or to a baby, or, so you know that sociolinguistic, different ways of communicating with others according to the text or to the interaction, to the cognitive situation, and pragmatic, the function. Here it looks like a monologue because there's a large time period of time to talk to you, and then he will be able to ask me questions. But so all these elements are also part of the cognitive language competence. So we have these skills: listening, speaking, reading, and action. For all of them, you will have this dimension: linguistic, sociolinguistic, and pragmatic. And only these skills are described through descriptors and levels of proficiency in the Common European Framework. But that's a lot. Can you imagine? Because it's listening, there is a linguistic part, sociolinguistic part, and pragmatic, and speaking, exactly. Oops. So there is a problem here. I don't know. Right. Okay. Don't know what happened. I was there, I think. And above the descriptors, you remember, you have the general competencies: knowledge, skill, existential, ability to learn. And they are all related to one another. So, and also, not only are they all related to one another, but interaction of all competencies in communication is really very, very important, because it's always there, and it's always a cultural, intercultural endeavor. So even though you can describe a lot of things, there is something irreducible in the communicative situation you're going to be in. So these five language proficiency, they have 6 levels for the Common European Framework. It's basic user A, A1, A2. Then we go to B, independent user, B1, B2, and C, proficient user, C1, C2. Here it's another way of presenting these different levels. So we can imagine that at A1 level, we have a certain stock, and A2 it's a bit bigger, and then bigger and bigger till C2. So it was based really this on empirical research. As I said to you, it took about 10 years from writing and conceiving, designing this CEFR, and it was really It was really the objective was to establish learning and teaching objectives, to help people review curricula, to design teaching materials, to provide a basis for recognizing language qualifications, thus facilitating educational and occupational mobility. because remember that what I said about the challenges, a political challenge, a linguistic challenge, an educative challenge. So the idea with this common European framework was to have some kind of common language for all language teachers in Europe, all over Europe, but not only language teachers, but learners of languages, decision makers, educationalists. And they also developed this kind of mobility with Erasmus. And that was the idea that a student in Spain, for example, who wanted to go to France, then they will be able to say, oh, okay, this student wants to do social sciences. He's got a B2 level. Is it possible for you to accept that student? So it was really a way to help European students to circulate, to go from one place to the other, and to create this kind of European space. So what the Common European Framework says is that level C2 is not intended to imply native speaker or non-native speaker competence. But in a way, it's I doubt that a little bit, because I don't know if you're familiar with the test, because now in Europe, all textbooks are framed according to this grid of A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. And they have tests to say that, you're A1 or you're B1, etc. And for C2, you have this Cambridge test, the IELTS, and in France you have DELF and DALF. And even if you're a native speaker, sometimes it's very, very difficult to get a C2 test sometimes, because they are very, very, very demanding in a way. Here you have the self-assessment grid for learners. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's interesting because a kind of summary of the descriptors. I mean, you've got 200 pages and you've got at least 80% of the Common European Framework having the descriptors of very, very precise descriptor for these 4 skills plus interaction. But here in the self-assessment grid, what is interesting is that you have this can-do, this descriptor in a very summarized way. You can see for A1 listening, so I can recognize familiar words and very basic phrases concerning myself, my family, and immediate concrete surroundings. Okay. For A2, I can understand phrasing and the highest frequency vocabulary related to areas of most immediate personal relevance. Okay. B1, I can understand the main points of clear standard speech and familiar mastered regularly encountered in work, school, leisure. Okay. B2, I can understand extended speech and lecture, so on and so forth. So I think they are quite clear. And it's really, really helpful for teachers and learners to use that self-assessment grid and to know exactly where they are with listening, reading, speaking, and writing. Now, what is the plurilingual and pluricultural competence? And here you see it's just I'm using the singular here. It's a general competence. It's not something that, it's a general concept. So that's why it's the plurilingual and pluricultural competence. It's very interesting because we have to think that it's an uneven or unbalanced changing competence. In fact, it is uneven in one or more ways. Learners, for example, generally attain greater proficiency in one dimension or in one language more than in the others. For example, they're going to learn English, and probably there will be Taiwanese students will attain maybe a B2 in English, and if they start French, it will be just A1. But they have that competence of using 2 European languages, but at different levels. Now, the profile of competencies in one language is different from that in the other. For example, you can be excellent in speaking 2 languages. You may be C1 in English and French, but good writing only in one of them. Maybe you will be able to write English in C1, but for French, well, maybe not. It depends. So you have to take into account the different trajectory of learners, explaining that they have different competencies in different languages, but also within a learned language, you're going to have different competencies. When you have this test, usually for B2 level, they will tell you that you are B2 level in all the skills. But some tests will tell you that you're only B2 in listening and A1 in writing, for example. So that's why it is quite complex, because sometimes you can have integrated level of language, but sometimes it's not. You can be good in listening and reading and have a lower level of proficiency in writing and speaking. Now, the pluricultural aspect and dimension, it differs from the plurilingual profile. For example, you can have good knowledge of the culture of the community, but a poor knowledge of its language. For example, in Taiwan, you may have professors in philosophy, so they know a lot about philosophy and maybe French philosophy. Maybe they can read a little philosophy, French philosophy in French. So they've got, through their knowledge, a very good knowledge of the culture through French philosophy, but their competency in French is probably, it will be limited. Well, it's just an illustration, it's just an example, a fictional example, just to show you that you can have a good knowledge of the culture and a poor knowledge of its language. But conversely, you can have a good knowledge of a language and a poor knowledge of the culture. For example, I will say in African countries, you have a lot of people using French as an official language, so they've got a good command of French. But do they know a lot about French culture? It's not necessarily good, and they have a good master of French. So that's just to say, and just to present this notion of plurilingual or pluricompetence, which is totally uneven. And I think it's important to have that in mind. So you have your L1, mother tongue, which is acquired naturally within the family and social environment. Then you have your L2, additional language that you learned later at school and through pedagogical progression. That is what is described, mainly that the focus of the CEFR. And you've got one or more L1, because you can, it's possible for you to be born in a multilingual country. I was mentioning Africa, and it's quite common in Africa that you have a lot of L1, more than one mother tongue. You can have a language to talk with your mother, another language to talk with your father, and in the village is going to be another one. But probably the competencies in these languages will be different. Where you're not going to develop these languages at the same level all the time. And then when you're a learner of additional languages later on through school, you're going to have the same system. You're going to learn different languages with different competencies in the different skills of any languages. So that's the notion of being plurilingual. Some people are born in multilingual settings, so they are plurilingual from the very beginning. And when you go to school and learn other languages, obviously you're becoming plurilingual because you're going to develop these different competencies in the different languages. Now, in 2018 and 2020, we have new descriptors. I think it was important just to update these descriptors of the CEF. Unfortunately, the translation is only in French and English. That's the only languages available at the moment. It's been quite a controversial document for the procedure because it didn't really take 10 years to design it. It was done more quickly. And also they extended the notion of competence, and of level that we know. So I think it was good for that. But they introduced also the notion of mediation, which is very important in languages. How do we mediate from one language to another when you're a learner or when you're a teacher? It's a very, very interesting concept. But that was the main criticism, because it was really understood through this notion of descriptors. And we're not so sure that it's possible to describe a mediation competence through A1, A2, B1, B2 level. So here you have a table showing you the descriptors of the CF in 2001 and the new descriptors of the new companion, the new volume in 2018. So the CEF, so I think have shown that it goes really beyond the European political guidelines for language education in Europe. Even it was the main objective at the beginning, we can see that this document clarifies a lot about competency-based teaching and learning because it introduced that notion of competence. So language users, learners, teachers, decision makers, textbook publishers, language testers have a common document or some kind of common framework or language, if you like, to negotiate levels of proficiency and pedagogical resources to scaffold learning and teaching. So the CEF, I think it's important. It's been innovative in language learning and teaching. First, with this notion of competency-based teaching, which is linked to competency-based learning. You can't dissociate that. You have all these levels from learners' competencies, but also for teacher competency for all users. The CEF developed the notion of pedagogical approach instead of pedagogical method. It's a broader view to include different research results. It refers to cognition, psycholinguistic, sociolinguistic, language policies and linguistic educational policies, sociology of language. So it's quite interdisciplinary as well. Even the focus is language and culture. It refers to a lot of disciplines. It's an action-oriented approach. We do with languages and in languages, and I think that was also an interesting point in the CEF. It introduces the notion of a plurilingual and pluricultural competence that I have just explained, because I think it's also a very interesting and important notion. The learner is viewed as a social agent, agencies of speakers and learners. That is to say, for quite a long time, we viewed learners as people who don't know anything about the foreign language, but in fact, they know about their own language, and that it can be the basis for learning more. So it's not tabula rasa. Okay, so the learner is a social agent. He's got resources and he's got some knowledge. Language learning is provided by schools and social environments, and language learning is viewed as a long life task and process. The objective of language learning is no longer the ultimate model of the native speaker, and I think that also it's very innovative in the Common European Framework. That is to say, that for quite a long time, and sometimes still is in a different educational setting, that to say, well, you're going to learn a foreign language and you will become just like a native speaker. But when you introduce this notion of plurilingual competence and pluricultural competence, obviously, it can no longer be the ultimate model. Language is used in communicating with others. Therefore, the culture and the intercultural dimension should not be cast aside, but integrated within the curriculum. Because language learning, and yes, it's language, but it's also culture, and you can't really dissociate, or you can sometimes, but it's the interrelation between language and culture are very strong, and we have to take that into account. And traditional language learning really didn't take that into account. It was the first objective was language, and the second one was culture. But we have to try to think, to organize language and culture at the same time. So the main critique toward the CEF that I've already said, it reduced language, culture, and intercultural competencies to scarce descriptors. So it's restricted, sometimes reductive view of competence due to the popularity of list can do. And maybe we have to reflect on a broad meaning of competence, the one I mentioned with the notion of plurilingual and pluricultural competence, or maybe do we need a change of word to explain this extreme variety of relationship that we have with our different languages. So intercultural learning environment, because that's the 21st century, and we are really in this period. So that's the knowledge society and the new millennium skills. We can see rapid evolution in ICTs, in mobility, in migration. When people go to another country in order to get better jobs, sometimes because there are problems with war or economic difficulties. So that a lot of mobility and migration. Now with COVID, it's a bit more difficult, but it's the trend. So there is a strong modification in our perspective of the world. It has affected the field of languages and of education. And I think all this ICT and this physical mobility have really changed the way we perceive the world. And in a way, it's comparable to former revolutions. The printing revolution in the 15th century, and then the industrial printing, and now it's digital. Everything is digital. So I think we are in a period of shifting approaches to language teaching and learning. We have these new ICTs, digitalization of society with learning and teaching. We have this notion of education through languages and languages through education. And in the big picture of globalization, internationalization, which is not only in English. Of course, English is very, very important, but we can see that the world is coming with all its diversity of languages and cultures. So the world is much more complex, and due to economic globalization, people, I think, become more aware of the multilingual and multicultural diversity of the world. With Google, you can have pages in Chinese, and then you click its pages in French, and then you click its pages in Spanish. So we have that notion of a multilingual, multicultural world. The language classroom is shifting towards a learning environment with increased use of activities, but also combined with more study abroad for young learners, students, and adults. Teachers need to acquire new competencies, how to combine blended learning, that is to say, switching from in-class and online, and now with COVID, I think combining in-class and online at the same time. How to design online learning only, because we have with the MOOC and all this stuff, they have their interest, and also how to design study abroad and how to put that in the whole curriculum. So how to design a relevant learning environment that could combine all dimensions, blended, online, study abroad, to foster cultural and intercultural dimensions in language learning and teaching. So that's where I come to, intercultural telecollaborations. So let's explain that partners in a telecollaborative project are learners from dispersed in different countries that have access to the use of internet to a variety of collaborative tools such as audio, chat, blogs, wikis, email, forum, etc. So it's a way to learners to enhance cultural interaction, dialogue, debate, intercultural exchanges, and obviously also with COVID, it's very, very important for learners to be in touch with their peers from other culture. So task-based learning intercultural collaboration, it's learning based on task. That's action-oriented. That's what having the common European work. Tasks are divided into three things: the pre-task, the task, and the post-task. And in order to develop intercultural awareness and reflexivity, tasks and projects should go along an experience journal. And so that is to say, learners in Taiwan with learners in France, they will talk maybe in English and will do tasks together and at the same time reflect experience in order to dissent from their bias. That's the traditional classroom. You have one and her and his pupil. Contents is really about language structure, function, text, culture. Pedagogies are really teacher-centered with drills, translation, and the PPP, presentation of a language structure, practice, introduction. And usually the model is of the native speaker. You learn a foreign language in order to speak with native speakers of that language. That was the traditional mindset. Nowadays, we've got online telecollaboration, intercultural telecollaboration with students and teachers from different locations, different time zones, different schedules, working all together, discussing and developing tasks together. Here, it's an intercultural telecollaboration that was in a class in France with students from Spain, Brazil, and Taiwan. So you can see the French students communicating with partners, and she has difficulty explaining what she wanted to say, and so she drew something in order to explain exactly where she was in France. So with this intercultural telecollaboration, you develop your listening and speaking skills, but also your reading and writing skills with a chat box or in a drive, and also through drawing to convey meaning. So intercultural telecollaboration, here multimodalities, multi-screens. Here you have, again, a French teacher, so she's communicating Taiwanese and Brazilian partners. At the same time, she's got another screen for writing in order to produce a task, and she's got also another screen for checking about word or to translate a word. Here, distant teachers and students moving around in class, okay, but we've got also robot now that people can move in class with this kind of system, so they are not stuck on the screen, but they can move around and go to different groups of people who are on the ground. Here you have Taiwanese students in France discussing with French students, with a Brazilian student with online. Here, with young learners, it was possible. We had a telecollaboration from last semester with the young learners. So the French kid, Tom, was at home, and he was able to communicate with Brian in Taiwan, and with support and help of my colleagues. Here with young learners from France and Spain communicating in English. And also in intercultural telecollaboration, we have to take into account the virtual worlds for, that are created, and when learners of different cultures and different languages can meet and discuss different things. I won't have time to show you, but I will give you the links, and you will be able to see this kind of virtual world. I think that's what we did with the Tikola project. It was quite innovative at the time, but I'm sure it's going to develop in the future. So this European project, I worked from 2013 to 2015 in the TILA project. So maybe I will just, I don't know if I have time, because I think I'm running out of time. So I'm just going to say that in this project, they are about intercultural telecollaboration, the TILA project and the Tikola project, with language teachers in Europe, language teachers in Spanish, in French, in English and German. So that's a lot of people, and trying to communicate and through BBB. Now we're using Zoom or Teams, and trying really to task for their students. And on this website, you will find a lot of document, teaching guides, tasks that you can use and adapt to your own circumstances in English and in the other languages, as I mentioned, French, Spanish, and German. That is, for example, in the Tikola project, you have on their website, you have tasks that you can really download and adapt to your own circumstances, tasks in A1, B1, etc. Sometimes it's just about listening, sometimes it's integrated. You've got all kinds of tasks. You've got pedagogical guides. Basically, I think it's in English and Spanish. You have voices, you have tools, and you've got case studies also to explain the different ecologies of this intercultural telecollaboration, and you've got also the final report. What is really important about intercultural telecollaboration, to have in mind that there are two language constellations. The first one is native speakers with native speakers. That is to say, Taiwanese students learning English with English in Britain, for example, or in Australia, learning Chinese. So they're native speakers of their own languages, and the partner is learning their own languages. So there is a reciprocity of languages, of target languages and culture. That's what we call a tandem. So basically, that's the traditional model of the pen friends in the old days. That is to say, you communicate your Taiwanese learner, you want English to communicate with Australian people, for example, and people will learn Chinese. So reciprocity of target languages and cultures. But in intercultural telecollaboration, because this world is more and more connected, we're going to develop a system where non-native speakers use a language, English, but the language is used as a lingua franca, and therefore there are different cultures at stake. For example, when I mentioned Taiwanese students English and speak English with French learners, okay? French learners are also learning English. But they can, of course, discuss about culture in Britain, in Australia, in America. But if they are together through this language of English, it's also to get to know another. It's to get to know about the Taiwanese culture and the French culture, for example, through the medium of English. So that's what we call the lingua franca. And all languages can be lingua franca. You can have French as a lingua franca, Chinese as a lingua franca, Chinese that could be used by French and German learners, for example. Why not? So I have. I don't know if I'm really a bit concerned about the time because I think I have to be very, very quick. So the traditional foreign language class, or EFL, it's a kind of learning, artificial learning environment because all learners have the same L1. So what is it?
Excuse me, Maxim.
Yeah.
Perhaps you have to wrap it up in about 1 or 2 minutes because of the time limit. Okay,
I agree. I agree. Thank you so much. So I'm going to be very, very quick. So that's traditional EFL class. And you've got one teacher with one class. Intercultural telecollaboration is more authentic because you've got two teachers from different countries with two classes or more. And they are forced to use the foreign language in order to communicate. So it's more authentic in that way. And it's a way to help practice. The traditional class teachers are alone to design tasks and to sensitize, to help their learners use the language in context. They have these linguistic trips, but usually they're all together again. So the language gain is very low, even though the cultural gain can be quite high, but it's limited to cultural collaboration, co-designing of tasks with the two teachers. So it's really in class that students and learners can practice the target language. They can do that also outside class because they have been matched. And in a way, it's a virtual linguistic trip, but at the same time, it's available to all students for a longer period. And they have the possibility to meet foreigners, which is more rarely the case in traditional settings. The model of the EFL class is the native speaker communicating with native speakers, whereas in intercultural telecollaboration, the model is of intelligible communication. So that's the model of the intercultural speaker communicating with native speaker, but also with non-native speaker. So it's inclusive. The objective is inclusive. So that is my conclusion. Intercultural telecollaboration, we call competencies for designing a learning environment. It develops cultural competence in task design, implementation, and assessment. It develops multiple competencies for students and teachers. It teaches competencies in intercultural communication with teachers and students. It develops competencies in CTs and in time management, scheduling, and all together. Merci. Thank you very much. And I think I'm okay with the time, and I'm sorry I have been a bit long, but I'm really happy for your questions.
Merci beaucoup. Okay. Thank you so much for this very informative speech. And I come to understand that this is making a room and everywhere very possible through this telecollaboration sort of learning. Okay. And do we have time for one question, perhaps? Any questions? Yeah. Anyone? Okay. We have one question from the audience.
Good.
Bonjour, je suis Prisca. Comment allez-vous?
Yeah.
Hi, so my name is Rizka. I'm from Indonesia, but currently I'm studying in Taiwan. I'm taking my PhD here. So I was like, when you mentioned about the motto of European Union, the EU, that unity in diversity, so I was like thinking, oh, this is very much the same with Indonesia because, as you know, Indonesia is having 17,000 island. We are having more than I think 700 local language, so we are very multilingual. So I can like totally relate. But my question is, what are the challenges that are facing mostly in this era? Like, because I know that you mentioned we need now like to be digitalized, so we need to use the technology and everything. But I think because in Europe, even I studied French like once. I take general French, that's why I can speak a little. But then like in French language, in particular, like you have feminine, masculine, and neutral, right? So it's like it's hard. And then maybe when you are there, like me, also when I'm in Taiwan and I speak English, they're like saying, no, like you're in Taiwan, you need to speak Chinese. Like it's not preferable that you speak English, even though maybe actually English is the lingua franca, like the language that we can use to communicate. So like I just want to know how is it like what's the challenge to do this in France particularly? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for showing us your plurilingual competence. Okay, so that was really, really nice. Yes, I mean, what you're saying is that really we are in a multilingual world with many different languages and different cultures. And we move more and more around, even though we're a bit limited with COVID. But here I'm with you in Taiwan, in a way. So it's frustrating, of course, because it will be much better to be there on the ground. But at the same time, it's wonderful, and I can have that conversation with you and that dialogue. So I think it's really showing my point. In language learning, we have to take into account all this technology and to take into account the different language trajectory of people. So to respect where they come from and the different competencies they can have in languages. And that we are there to facilitate communication and dialogue with our learners. And try to develop, yes, to maintain diversity and to foster dialogue through diversity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this answer. And that's good timing. It's 4:00 sharp. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.